Can you hear me? Can you see me? I'm asking because we Asian Americans are the invisible minority, excuse me. I have to stop and advise you that this is not an ordinary welcome. I need to set the background for today's service. I think we Asians are often invisible in this country. We are invisible, that is, until someone notices us and says, "Where did they come from?" And then we become a threat and the enemy. I grew up in a small conservative town in central Pennsylvania, a son of the only Asian within 90 miles during World War II. My obviously progressive Caucasian mother married my Korean father in 1930. Pennsylvania allowed such marriages, but as a child I still learned something about what being the enemy feels like during World War II. When did Asians seem to be a threat and the enemy? A few examples. In World War II, when we were at war with Germany, and German Nazis were murdering thousands of members of the Jewish faith, thus committing one of the greatest atrocities this world has ever seen, our government did not steal the homes and businesses of German Americans. The homes and businesses of Japanese Americans were stolen, and Japanese were thrown into concentration camps. Recently, when asylum seekers from South America were also thrown into concentration camps, Japanese Americans protested those camps vehemently en masse. Much earlier, in 1869, after immigrated Chinese helped to build the Continental Railroad, people in power thanked them, quoting quotes, by not including them in the photograph that illustrated the uniting of that railroad. They also didn't receive equal pay. That photo is in the bulletin. The Chinese were targets of a vast campaign of racism and hate, resulting in lynching, riots, assaults, massacres, and more. That was not only done by racist citizens, but it seemed to be endorsed by our government. The massacre of the Chinese involved murdering and hanging. Yes, also hanging many of them after they were murdered. About 10% of the Chinese population at that time were victims. Only 8 of the 500 who committed those heinous acts were convicted. How long did they stay in jail? They were released on a technicality. Have you heard that before? There were thousands of anti-Chinese ads then. One is in your bulletin. Check it out. The hatred against the Chinese was so intense that our government passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, denying all Chinese the right to immigrate. We have seen a slightly veiled return to that strategy with the deplorable barring of immigrants and members of the Muslim faith and South American asylum seekers. Suddenly, they too are the enemy. The consequences of that law and various modifications and limitations lasted until 1965, 83 years, when the Immigration and Nationalization Act of 1965 was passed. Incidentally, if you saw that ad in the bulletin, it shows Uncle Sam, aka our government, assisted by other marginalized people building a wall against the Chinese. The others complied. At least they were not Chinese. The same tactic is used against the LGBTQIA community when homophobes recruit other marginalized people to join them. they essentially tell them, but not in these words, at least you're not gay. When Japanese cars began to be imported in the 1980s, they were not the first cars to be imported. Strangely, the first foreign car imported was the VW Beetle. Now, I know you don't remember this, but that was Hitler's favorite car. It came here shortly after World War II in 1949. It was followed by the BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and other VWs. Then when Japanese cars started coming in, suddenly the U.S. auto industry was threatened, and once again, Asians became the enemy. Thus, we are here today. Suddenly, Vincent Chin, a truly innocent man, was the enemy. After working for peace and justice for 6 decades, I had hopes that racism, xenophobia, homophobia, and all the other anti-human phobias would end and be greatly reduced in the 21st century. Sadly, they have not. In the Asian American community alone, there have been more than 10,300 assaults and murders against us, including many elderly, just since the pandemic. Suddenly, we're the enemy. Have you heard that number before? 10,300? Perhaps not. Sometimes we are invisible. I began writing a shorter, less involved welcome, but there behind me hang 2 banners that have been displayed in this sanctuary for at least 30 years. They and our 52-year-old symbol on the top of your inside bulletin remind me of what we must do if we are truly to live up to our role as simply being a part of humanity. Besides, at 86, I may not have a decade left to express myself in public. Most of that symbol is obvious. It is in the United Nations blue for a reason. But that circle is not an ordinary circle only representing unity. It now stands for the continuum of humanity, all of it, accepted and loved equally. I'd like to read our welcoming statement. Central United Methodist Church is a reconciling congregation, regardless of your race, ethnicity, immigration status, gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic situation, age, ability, belief, or background. Whether you are single or partnered, you are God's beloved, and you are welcome here. We are not unique in welcoming those communities. But did you notice? You are mentioned. Yes, we are all mentioned. And every one of the community of which we are part of are under attack and threatened in some way. When we attack any part of the continuum of humanity, we are attacking ourselves. To both those present, and what I hope will be thousands at home, thank you for being here. We at Central Church are honored to be hosting this gathering with the American Citizens for Justice. ACJ is a shining example of how an atrocious murder followed by erroneous verdicts can unite a group to not only work for justice for Vincent, but to transform itself into an incredible advocate for victims of discrimination and help for immigrants trying to navigate this often callous society. Thank you, ACJ, for your service. We are in this historic church because this church served the Chinese community during the last 30 years of Chinese exclusion. The Chin family were members of our congregation at that time, and Vincent Chin's funeral was held here 40 years ago. The assaults on Asian Americans and the increased assaults on other oppressed, marginalized, and minoritized communities, some represented here today, inspired us to develop today's service. We hope this service will lead to strengthening the bond among all oppressed people as we continue working together in both dialogue and supportive action. Thank you, speakers of justice. We are grateful for your participation.
Good morning. I invite you to stand in body or in spirit for our call to worship. Listen, justice seekers, for creation is calling. The ultimate measure of a person is not where they stand in moments of comfort and convenience, but where they stand at times of challenge and controversy. In difficult times, the earth calls us to join the movement of courageous truth-tellers. In comfortable times, our siblings who know suffering call us to join the movement of silence breakers. In times of struggle, the human family calls us to join the movement toward freedom. In times of peace, the universe calls us to join the movement toward justice. In all times, call us to join with the movement of that which is set apart, which some of us call holy or sacred. Listen, justice makers, for the voices of the most vulnerable are calling. Make a career of humanity. Commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You will make a better person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. Let us join our hearts together, listening for the voices that call us to join the movement of love. I invite us to remain standing as we sing together, "This Is My Song."
American Citizens for Justice. I'm glad to welcome you to this commemoration and remembrance of Vincent Chin. It's so good to be here at Central Methodist Church. I was an acolyte in the 1960s, coming down this altar, carrying the United Nations flag every Sunday, so I have fond memories of Central. We are here gathered 40 years after the killing of Vincent Chin to say the name, Vincent Chin. Remember the names, along with others like Vicha Radapakti, Christina Yuna Lee, Michelle Go, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery. There's a pattern here. This is a call for prayer, a call for action, and a call for solidarity. It's important to remember what was said on June 19th, 1982, because VUMFs were out of work. That's what Mr. Ebbins said. Just emblematic of the othering that was going on. Much like what happened in 1871 in Chinatown, Los Angeles, with lynchings of the local Chinese community residents. The same othering that occurred with the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. Othering is an issue. It's been an issue then, and it's an issue now. It's also important to remember what Vincent Chin said, his last words. It's not fair. That is the clarion call for us to take care of our community, to address the injustices and inequities that are happening to all communities of color. This is an opportunity today to engage in prayer, to soothe the soul, and to engage in healing. It's a time for reflection from 1982 to 2002 to address the grievances of society and to remind ourselves that we are in a movement for solidarity and addressing justice. It's important as we address the othering that is going on that we remind ourselves of the important passages that remind us of our mission. Love thy neighbor as yourself. We are also justice seekers. Religious leaders, you have your place. Please spread the word to your congregations, to your followers, and to the whole community as we build a beloved community, as we work to end exclusion and to end violence. Remember Vincent Chin as we remember to commit ourselves to unity, solidarity, and justice. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sergio Martinez. I am I'm many things because I guess society labels us as many things, and I would start off by always claiming an undocumented immigrant. My parents brought me here when I was 5 years old. I am a DACA recipient and one of the first people to come out as undocumented in the state of Michigan. That experience taught me so many things. It taught me so many things that you could only learn through this experience. 11 years ago, it was really difficult to stand up here and share that publicly, especially with cameras and Border Patrol and ICE not knowing what their response would be. So it was a very challenging time, but the reason that I did it was because I saw what was going around in my community. I saw my parents struggling. Sorry. Let me fix this. I saw my parents struggling. I saw my parents in fear. I saw my family's friends and family in fear. Out of nowhere, when they reversed, when they basically started asking people for social security numbers for identifications, it really just the disparity in between the people living in the shadows like myself was complex. We tried to do the right thing, and then that's when we started acting organizing our communities and making sure that we were meeting with our elected officials, people who were in charge of ICE, people who were in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, and here we are doing this as young people, scared out of our minds because we don't know if they're going to come after our families, our friends, if we're going to get detained when we go home. But what was worse than that is knowing that we not only had to deal with that, we had to worry about being stopped by a police officer for a broken taillight, or a stop sign, or a simple traffic violation that would end us up in deportation proceedings for no reason, creating, orphans here in the state of Michigan. This is something that there's a pattern through all of this. There's a pattern with people that we haven't even mentioned today, that we can spend days with the disparity in everybody's life, and we all want the same thing. We want to be respected, we want our families to be respected, and we want to feel safe. It doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter how much money you have in your pocket, or like who you love, because that's another part of me. I am a gay Mexican undocumented immigrant, and that's like a lot. You get basically like you check all of the boxes, but that made me stronger, it made me prouder, and it made people in my situation and in my age group say, if he can do it and he didn't get deported, I can do it too, because we're so frustrated with the mistreatment of our families. There are people who have not been mentioned. It's very difficult to be having to come out as undocumented, as a Mexican immigrant, and as gay. So it's just, I don't understand why that's relevant to anybody but myself and my partner, but here we are. So we don't say enough about Matthew Shepard. He was bashed in a homophobic way. He was left to die tied to a pole just because he was gay. Ryan White, he was a young person who developed HIV that turned into AIDS, and he was discriminated against in his neighborhood, in his community, in his school. He could not go to school because he was a child with AIDS. We need to remember Marsha P. Johnson, a trans woman, somebody who housed people, one of the first trans people in New York City who was found in a river, and they claimed it as suicide. For everything, especially Vincent Chin, racial bashing, none of these people are ever held accountable. None of these people ever, this is never enough for our country to change laws to protect us all. It's never enough, and look at where we are now. DACA really did change my life in such a good way, but it's not a permanent solution. My parents are still deportable. My aunts and my uncles are still deportable. I have family in Mexico that are ill and ailing, and they may pass soon, and I can't see them because of immigration laws. Immigration is a system that has been broken, and it has been built to dehumanize communities that are vulnerable, to fearmonger those communities that are vulnerable, the people who are seeking asylum. Instead of being the shiny hill and the American dream and the most welcoming country in the world, we put those asylum seekers in cages. We lock them up for longer than we have to. We separate them from their families, and we traumatize those children. Growing up undocumented and in the shadows is something that I will never forget. But my parents brought me here because they wanted a better life for me. And that is not a criminal act. That is something that people are entitled to. Anywhere in the world, we should be welcoming them and making sure that they are better here than they are in their homes, because that's why they're leaving everything they have to be here, not to be discriminated against more than they were, or even like just treated the same. So all of this just has to do with respecting each other's religion, communities, culture, sexuality. Anything that is taboo shouldn't be, because we all have more in common than we do that is different. And everything that we have to do, I know this is terrible, because to me it's like, I motivate, I activate, I organize, and I get out people to vote, right? And I'm not eligible to vote. I can't legally vote. So, but what I can do is motivate others and educate people, and you know, make sure that you know your vote is great. But we need you to make calls. We need you to send emails. We need you to knock doors. We need you to talk to your neighbors and make sure that all of these people who are treating us so differently because of what we look like or who we are, these people are in a position of control over our lives, and they're not making it better, they're making it worse. So we need to hold them accountable. All of this just has to do with respecting each other, appreciating each other, proving to people that love is love, and it doesn't matter what that is. That doesn't necessarily mean like just because it's Pride Month, it's a gay thing. Love for your neighbor, love for anybody that doesn't look like you, having compassion, all of these things we can teach. So I'm just up here, just if I can do it. 10 years ago and nothing has been done and we're still being attacked, we can motivate other people to be vulnerable and to make sure that we have their backs. Because I don't want to get too personal, but Pastor Jill opened her doors to me with open arms, and here I feel safe because of her and people like her in the community in that moment. When I felt I was going to get deported because I'm an illegal or undocumented or however they want to phrase it, I was welcomed, and that gave me power and strength to do more political activism and work. So we can definitely do the work, and I appreciate everybody here. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Wake up. Good morning. Saturday. It's about 190 degrees outside. I'm just kidding. It's only 90. I bring you greetings from Michigan Welfare Rights, and I welcome you to this church. The great and powerful Oz is one phrase. We call it the Church of What's Happening Now. I'm a member here. I was here when we found Pastor Jill, and I was here before we found Pastor Jill, and I'll probably be here after Pastor Jill gets tired of us and runs away. Okay? That's what's going to happen. I want to take us just very briefly on a trip down memory lane. In this country, there are pockets of discrimination. There are groups of people that have a profile, that have a reputation. And these are folks that have been maligned and labeled, and we've learned it. We've learned this information. I'll take you down this trail. The only thing I knew for the longest time about folks of Asian descent came from watching the Rifleman on TV. And in the Rifleman and the cities that he visited, they had people from China who opened up laundries. That's what I knew. Hop Sing was a cook on Bonanza. That's what I knew. Hey Boy was a maintenance worker and a message carrier on Have Gun Will Travel. You remember, Paladin would go get Hey Boy and take this to my room and take this to that place. That's what I knew. And who can forget the wonderful Charlie Chan, the first investigator, and his cryptic English and quoting. That's what I knew about people of Asian descent. Then you jump over to Errol Flynn movies. Errol Flynn was always in the Crusades on the Christian side, leading thousands of people against the Muslims. That was the message. Christians have to be against Muslims. That's the message. And every movie that Errol Flynn was in with that theme, you rooted for the Errol Flynn side, because there must be something wrong with these Muslims. Then you met the Sheik, wrestling, and the Sheik was a good wrestler, but he was sneaky and he was conniving. You're learning. You're being taught a message. Then here comes Mantan Moreland and Stephen Fletcher, black actors. And they're always scratching and they're always shuffling, and, you know, a message being sent that this is a population to be denigrated. Always the fact that people are hurting all of these populations in these different segments, it must be something that they did wrong. It was guaranteed and codified. Well, here comes the Lone Ranger. And here comes Native Americans and the slogans that came out that make you cringe. The only good Indian is a dead Indian. An Indian giver gives you something, it takes it back. We're learning. We're getting a message. Poor white people from the South, ignorant. They don't wear shoes. They don't know how to count. Always a label. They're backwards, uneducated. They're hardworking, but it's just so much you could do with a hillbilly. That's the name. This is the history of America. This is what we count to. Jewish people are no good. There's something wrong with them. Disabled people always want something. Something wrong with them. Different groups. We landed on gay people. There's something wrong with them. Yesterday, it was my turn. Women, something wrong with me. This is the history of this nation. And I say to you, that's fine. And after you go through this group and this group and this group, we get to Vincent. He wasn't killed, he was murdered. See the difference between you can get killed in a car accident. He was murdered. Somebody took a baseball bat and hit him in the head. They didn't hit him in the foot. They didn't hit him in the hand. They hit him in the head. I know something about murder because you're a person that looks different. I know a little something about that. So here it is, 40 years later, and we're thinking about this young man who had at least 10 years, maybe 20 years, maybe 50 additional years to live. And somebody was upset with him and blamed him for problems in the automobile manufacturing production activity. One little guy, and took his life. But that wasn't the end of it. Go to court, have a decision made, $3,000, $4,000 fine paid, everybody goes home and keep on doing business as usual. This is where we live. This is who we are. This is how we are. And we've been praying, and we've been organizing, and we've been having discussions. We've been doing all those things for at least 40 years with young Vincent. I don't know when a rifleman came on, at least 50 years ago. We've been doing the same thing over and over and over again, and we seem to expect a different outcome. I think you all are familiar with that phrase. You keep doing the same thing over and over again, and you think something's going to change, it probably won't. The issue is that we need to call out this violence. but we also need to identify the corporate mistake that was made. And that corporate mistake was that some people got together and wrote a document. And the first few words of that document are "we the people," in order to form a more perfect union. What is a more perfect union? That phrase says that we're starting from here, and we're flawed, and we're broken, and we're weak, but we know the direction that we're going in. Shouldn't have wrote those words. For sure shouldn't have figured it out that I could read them, because I understand pretty damn what a more perfect union looks like. This is not it. But I know what it does look like, and all I can say to the members of this young man's family, to his friends, to all of us that have been in one of these pockets where somebody doesn't like you because, you know, something you did, something you look like, you're in the right place today, because at Central, we don't care. We don't care who you like. We don't care who you sleep with. We don't care how you pray. We don't care about none of those things. We are only interested here is, do you want to see a better world? Do you love God? You're supposed to be in one of these pews. That's how it works here at Central. As I end my statements today, and if I sound angry, I sound like this all the time. It never changes. I'm mad all the damn time because we have the tools to do better. We have the wherewithal to do better. We have the weapons to make peace. Sounds funny. We have the weapons to make peace. We just won't do it because we keep waiting for somebody else. And I tell you, in welfare rights, whatever this was that happened yesterday, whatever this was that happened 40 years ago, and all the things in between, she is my friend. The imam is my friend. The other folks in this church, as Dave back there scares me on the weekends coming into church at night. I don't care about all of these personal innuendos, and we're going to have to give over these specific problems we have as well. If you're born and you manage to get through the birthing process, then you are supposed to be on the side of peace and love. My name is Maureen Taylor. I'm state chairperson of the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization, and you can tell why they keep me here. Good afternoon. I forgot already, and Art is telling me I have something else to do. The First Nation prayer, and I'm going to read it. It's a beautiful prayer. Creator, open our hearts to peace and healing between all people. Creator, open our hearts to provide and protect for all children. Creator, open our hearts to respect for all of the earth and all the gifts of the earth. Creator, open our hearts to end exclusion, violence, and fear among all. Thank you for these gifts of this day and every day. Amen.
Interfaith Outreach Network, and also the Rabbi at Temple Beth Israel in Bay City, Michigan. And it's only a couple weeks ago that I was on a Saturday morning, it's Shabbat, and I normally am in synagogue or praying, but some things call me to be there. And it was only a couple weeks ago, I was marching on a Saturday morning with one of your neighbors, Reverend Barry Randolph, in the Stop the Violence March down on Jefferson and East Grand Boulevard. And today, when Reverend Rowe, my friend, called and asked if I would participate in this interfaith service, I said, of course. So it is a shame and a sad moment that we have to have these services, but being said, it means it's important that we stand up. I personally am a child of Holocaust survivors. My mother from Luxembourg, my dad from Germany. And I grew up with always being told that we were refugees. Hine matov umanayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers and sisters can live together. These words from the biblical book of Proverbs present us with an ideal that our society, even today, thousands of years later, has not quite achieved. Today, as we observe the 40th anniversary of the terrible attack and murder of Vincent here in Detroit, we are aware that unfortunately, racism is yet alive and that there have been new recent incidents against Asian Americans that deeply disturb us. Another section of the Bible of action we need to take that possibly could have saved Vincent and that we can use to prevent future tragedies. It is in the book of Leviticus, verse 16, which states, Al ta'amod al dam reyecha. Do not stand idly by when your neighbor's blood is shed. This precept reflects the highest value in Judaism, which is preserving life, and has been interpreted so that a person should always intervene when another person is being attacked or their life is in danger, especially if one has the skills to save a life and the danger to your own self is not too great. If you do not have the skills or training or means to save another, then you are obligated to notify someone else who can help. But beyond being directly involved in such a situation, there's much that can be done to prevent this situation in the first place. We are taught, and is always emphasized at our Passover Seder, that, quote, we Jews were strangers in the land of Egypt, and that is why we were abused and beaten by Pharaoh and made into slaves for 400 years. The intention of recalling this is to motivate us to speak out, to offer our help, to educate, and do whatever is necessary to stop the oppression of other people. It is for this reason that the Jews were the ones who created the first labor union in this country, who marched with Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement and helped create the NAACP, who runs such organizations today as the Anti-Defamation League and the Jewish Vocational Service, which are open to all people. We can defeat racism and injustice if we teach our children that we were all created by one God, and that therefore the saving of one life is equal to saving a whole world, as our sages have said. For who knows who might be the next Yo-Yo Ma, the next Yamasaki, the next Christy Yamaguchi, or the next Bruce Lee. I believe that it is possible to end prejudice and eliminate racial hatred when we show by our examples as a community that we can live together and work together and become friends. We can break bread together, enjoy all kinds of events together, and show that we care about each other by offering our help whenever and wherever it is needed. There was recently a study made by a chaplain at the University of Oregon who wanted to understand the backgrounds of Christians who risked their lives during the Holocaust to save Jews. He was trying to ascertain what motivated each person at the moment of intervention and what exactly did they say to themselves to make the commitment to help. He found that all who were willing to intervene had had strong religious education and solid religious values. They had attended Sunday school as kids, had gone to church and read the Bible. They also found that each of them had a strong role model to inspire and motivate them. Some said, "My mother and father always helped me, so how could I stand by now?" Or, "My teacher in Sunday school said that one day I might be tested in my religion." Or, "I had a friend or relative who represented the very best, and I would like to be that same way." Let us take the implications of this research to our hearts. Let us do what we can to make this world a better place where truly brothers and sisters can live together in peace. Amen.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Peace be upon you all. Honoring the vision of Pastor Jill, previous Pastor Rowe, and also American citizens, justice, and Central UMC Committee for Peace and Justice. That's a great vision. I am so happy to hear all these wonderful, inspiring statements this morning. I think something with the battery of this thing. You don't have to change it now, but maybe for the main message, if there is the in charge of battery, 40th anniversary of Vincent Shin's death. And as we heard, his murder. In Islamic traditions, we call case like that as martyrdom. It's not just murder, but martyrdom. The killers, the criminals, they escape justice in the court of law, in the court of their conscience, but they won't be able to escape justice in the court of Creator. Because as people of faith, we believe in the day of justice and the judgment of the Creator, who is loving but also just. Racism is coming from devil. Justice and equality is an order from God. The first racist was the Satan. In our traditions, when he did not humble himself to Adam, and he told God, خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين. You created me out of fire, but Adam out of dirt. أنا خير من. I am better than him. So the first one who said I am better than him was the Satan. And this pandemic continued till today. We heard from the previous speakers that there were moments that we thought it was over. Those of you who lived in this area, in Detroit area in 1990, when in the same June 28 actually, next week, when Nelson Mandela came to Detroit, 1990, and he was welcomed by Rosa Parks in Tiger Stadium, and 50,000 people were listening to late Nelson Mandela after he made that historic lecture in Congress, joint session of Congress with the late President Bush. And 15 times his lecture interrupted, everybody is standing and clapping, and when we heard that, we thought racism was over. We celebrated, we are in heaven. The gates of paradise open to this planet. But it was not over. When I Have a Dream was held, we thought it was over, but continued. And this pandemic, this disease of racism, is against the purpose of creation. Because God said that we created you out of Adam and Eve. This diversity was meant to be a source of knowledge and understanding of one another, that you know each other, not that you kill each other. Asian Americans, Chinese Americans have been a great to this nation. And migration, nowadays you see, you cannot find somebody to work. This crisis of working now, because immigration is the secret of dynamism and life in this country, and this country cannot survive without immigration. So their presence was a huge, and is a huge contribution to this country. But those people who killed Vincent and continued this racism and this ugliness and madness and craziness of racism Even during these last 3 years of pandemic, they did this out of their ignorance, out of greed and selfishness and arrogance. But it was starting from ignorance. So as Rabbi said, the solution is to teach the new generation that, as we are talking about vaccination of kids against coronavirus, we have to do the vaccination against the disease of racism and teach them that God is God of justice and peace. Yesterday, day before yesterday, I asked my son, he's turned to 12, and I said, Muhammad Hussein, we have over 200 names of God in the Quran. And then in traditions, there are thousands of names for God. We have the same destination, but everybody goes through different directions and different roads to get to united destination. So there are so many different names for God. I said, out of these 200 God's names in the Quran, which one you think was the most beautiful? First he said Allah. I said Allah is like a personal name for God in Arabic. Like in English, God is like a personal name for God. We cannot name our son like Allah, right? Is not name for creator. Even Jesus, like a lot of people in this country, you don't choose Jesus like as a name for a male. But I said, tell me about those beautiful names that are general names of God. Out of 200, which one would you choose? And he said, I choose As-Salam, which means peace. God is peace. I choose that name. That is the most beautiful name for God. God of peace. We need that peace in our family. We need it in our community. We need it in the country and the world. And that lesson must be taught in the school of family, the first school of love, first school of respect, the first school of inclusion, the first school of solidarity and support for humanity. So when our children learn that hatred and killing is wrong, but peace and healing must be our road, then we are in good shape. We can change the names. We thought that Juneteenth in 1868 was it? We thought at that time racism was over. And the president last year made it like a federal holiday, Juneteenth. But it was not over. How we can get it over? This gathering today is a contribution to that. We need to continue this dialogue, this conversation as a national conversation, that white supremacy, racism, in any format, is not only against African American, Chinese American, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. All these forms of racism are rebellion against God, and these are from devil, not from divine. And if we go to the teachings of Moses, teachings of Jesus, teachings of Muhammad, and so many other ambassadors of peace on this earth, we learn that peace was the purpose of our life, and peace is paradise, our final destination. We pray for peace, we pray for justice, we pray for inclusion, we pray for wisdom and understanding, that we become one nation under God, not just to claim it, not just to say one nation under God. Make it a commitment, not only a claim. What is it to say one nation under God, but be so many nations under gun? It doesn't work that way. We pray to be one nation under God. God bless you. Thank you so much.
to be with you, not only because of the incredible importance of this work, and not only because we have a chance to echo and amplify the message of a service of recommitment from so many years ago, but also because this congregation is special in its long commitment to and engagement in the work of peace and justice for many peoples. So thank you for this invitation. My name is Laura Mariko Heifetz. I serve as Assistant Dean at Vanderbilt Divinity School in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm ordained Presbyterian minister, but some of my best friends are Methodists. I was born in California, raised in the Pacific Northwest, went to school and worked in Chicago, and have lived and worked in the South for 12 years. My mother's family is Japanese American. My father's family is white Jewish. I grew up learning how to take pride in being Japanese and Jewish, and I also grew up learning about Japanese American incarceration and anti-Semitism, and the ways in which people are diminished by racism, religious bigotry, and economic inequality. But when Vincent Chin was murdered, torn away from us by horrific violence, I was younger than 4 years old. I was busy playing outside and learning how to read when people here were working tirelessly to build coalitions, raise consciousness, show up over and over again to demand that Asian Americans be seen as human. I saw the film Who Killed Vincent Chin and learned about this case in college, and it transformed me. It shaped my dedication to racial justice, gave sharper edges to my racial identity, already shaped by both pride in who I am and the knowledge of what had gone horribly wrong. It led me toward a shared Asian American identity and commitment. My mom's cousin, Jim Shimura, or Cousin Jimmy, as we refer to him, was integral in this struggle, something I did not know until I was in my 30s. And yes, I had a few words with my family about that. The murder of Vincent Chin, the work of his family and friends, of my family, of this community, shaped who I have become. I hate that he is not here with us, but in a way, he is, because Vincent Chin continues to drive us toward a more just world. He is the one bringing us together, and he continues to inspire generations. We are gathered here in his honor, but we are also here because of all of our diverse reasons. We are in the midst of experiencing a fundamental disconnect in the world between who we were created to be and who the world tells us we are. This is what white supremacy does to our personhood. We enter beloved of the Creator, each one unique and beautiful, brought into a community, and over time, the realities of the structures of society invade our worlds. White supremacy does that. Patriarchy warps our homes and our possibilities. Racism in healthcare defines our health outcomes before we are even born. A society that accepts and even engineers economic inequality as an acceptable side effect to concentrating wealth in the hands of a few means we come into this world and too many of us experience real hunger and housing insecurity before we even get to school. White supremacy means that none of us, not even white people, are just allowed to be. Instead of getting home safely, Asian American women are followed to our homes to be murdered, like Christina Yuna Lee in New York. It means Vincent Chin couldn't enjoy a night out with his friends without racialized harassment and violence. Indigenous women cannot go about their lives without fear of disappearing due to violence and apathy. Jewish people cannot worship without being taken hostage. Muslims and Sikhs are targeted over and over again for looking like whatever the Orientalist imagination has cooked up. Black people are not allowed to sleep, shop, drive, go birding in Central Park without harassment or state-sponsored violence. Transgender people and queer people are not allowed to use a restroom or walk down the street or love without bracing ourselves for potential violence. Latinos cannot shop for back-to-school supplies or go to school without threats of violence or death or their parents disappearing. Children of all backgrounds cannot learn learn without gun violence or disparate resources based on their race and class. And even white people have been prevented from enjoying a society that allows them to love and learn and flourish, because enforcing white supremacy became more important than allowing people to be who they are, love who they love, learn whatever interests them. We are here today because that feels so wrong, like we are trapped in an arrangement, a design for dehumanization, and we know it doesn't have to be this way. We were created for joy. We were created to make art, food, life, change, families, community. We were created to make meaning. We were created to seek the sacred around us. We were created to make mistakes and learn from them. We were created to be whomever and whatever, and instead we are told we are not normal simply because the vast majority of us do not fit narrow definitions that white supremacy gives us. Those of us minoritized and marginalized because of our race, nationality, ethnicity, religion, gender expression and identity, sexual orientation, age, class, HIV/AIDS status. The problem is not our bodies. The problem is the ideology of white supremacy and its manifestations, the isms that shape our possibilities. White supremacy divides us from each other. It hardens people. It dehumanizes us. People cannot see each other as siblings, despite coming from religious traditions that emphasize our createdness for relationship. People see each other as profit margins, units of labor, human incubators, competitors. We are separated from our own bodies and from all of creation. Instead of seeing ourselves as related to all that exists, we are taught to see ourselves as individuals, independent instead of interdependent. We are shaped by a white supremacist society that sets us up in a drive to dominate one another and to dominate creation. We are raised by values that lead us to police one another instead of build community. Even the best of us have occasionally fallen for tricks of white supremacy that lead us to buy into stereotypes, to see each other as invaders or enemies instead of potential collaborators, instead of family. Of course, interdependence and fighting white supremacy doesn't mean eliminating race or pretending we are colorblind, or for that matter, make religion, gender, or sexual orientation matter less, because they are what bring life and color and flavor and meaning to this world. We were created to be this way, and it's not our fault that society assigns values to our identities. As the prophet Jeremiah wrote to the exiles in Babylon from the Hebrew Bible, "For surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope." Instead, we can leverage those diverse identities, those labels for communal power, for power in solidarity. Society may count us by our collective traumas, but what we bring to our collective work for liberation, to our collective hopes, dreams, and triumphs, is our particularities. We can count each other by collective joy. We exist as real people, outside of white imagination, outside of white supremacist fear and hate, transphobic and homophobic bigotry, outside of misogynistic fantasies of female subjugation. As Bo Ki-an, a nurse played by a nurse on the Shonda Rhimes show Grey's Anatomy, said to other Asian American doctors and nurses discussing the rise in anti-Asian hate, "Your faces are American." I have been allowing myself to wallow in despair the past few weeks. It got amped up yesterday because of what it means to be American, or as is more accurate, United Stations, because we do share the term America with two whole continents, but the United States is uniquely us. It is this country, the United States, and my fellow United Statians that have provided models for being ourselves in spite of white supremacy, and we have found that we can show one another what community looks like. Filipinos and Mexicans banded together in the farm worker movement, and before them, Japanese and Mexican workers improved working conditions together. Punjabi men and Mexican women created families together. Black and indigenous and white people in the very early days of what would become this country worked together to demand better conditions. Asian Americans joined in the Black Power movement. Grace Lee Boggs' dedication to her entire life to growing that movement. Black and Asian American and more communities coming together to fight for justice for Vincent Chin. Immigrants of all backgrounds working with black and white workers to fight for 15, to raise the minimum wage. Religious leaders joining each other at every turn, at every service, at every vigil, to support one another and their people in times of crisis, to share in the work of economic and gender justice, to protest war, to protest the elimination of a constitutional right to abortion. This is also what it means for us to be here. How we leverage our power is in the depths of our relationships, how we come together to be in struggle to make this place better. We need each other. The work begun here, recommitted to here, is a commitment to see all who surround us as our relatives. We are the inheritors of stories of people who had moments where they were brave, and now it is our turn again to be brave. It is our turn to take up our part in the story of what it means to be a United Station, in defiance of the ugliness unearthed by anti-Asian hate, of those who refuse to believe Black Lives Matter, of those who would rob transgender people of their identities, of those who commit violence to create a Christian nationalist regime. We did not get here under our own power. We are here because of movements, because of the work of communities, of everyday organizers. Interdependence is how we are meant to be, how we were created to be, and not just interdependence with other humans, with other communities, but also with creation. We are never alone, even if we are the only human for miles around. There is a poem by Marge Piercy of Detroit that reads, "What can they do to you? Whatever they want. How can you stop them? Alone you can fight, you can refuse, but two people fighting back to back can cut through a mob. A snake dancing fire can break a cordon. Termites can bring down a mansion. Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. Three people are a delegation, a cell, a wedge. With four, you can play games and start a collective. With six, you can rent a whole house and have pie for dinner with no seconds and make your own music. 13 makes a circle, 100 fill a hall, 1,000 have solidarity and your own newsletter. 10,000, community and your own papers. 100,000, a network of communities. 1,000,000, our own world. It goes one at a time. It starts when you say we and know who you mean. Rabbi Hillel said, "What is hateful to you, do not do to others. This is the law. All the rest is commentary." The interdependence we already have in movements by virtue of inhabiting the same world together requires greater responsibility. Stare difference in the face, and instead of saying, "I don't understand you," we could choose to say, "You are beautiful and I will love you." Turn toward those who mock us with their hatred or their indifference and engage. These turning points for our communities, demanding justice, so often emerge from a great act of violence. And for us, we might feel very tired in this moment. Yesterday's striking down of Roe versus Wade felt like being hit by a wave when we were already sitting down. Transgender kids are no longer able to be who they are meant to be. Pride festivals live in fear of white supremacist violence. Religious gatherings require security because of threats that are very real. the deeply held belief by too many that Black lives do not in fact matter, the ongoing commitment of the status quo to the criminalization of migration, dehumanizing and making invisible Indigenous people, including Native Hawaiians and Alaskans, and the ongoing colonial violence against Pacific Islanders and Puerto Ricans, and the ever-dangerous hatred of Asian Americans and Latinx folk, those with roots in this country stretching back generations but always assumed to be an invading foreign force. The violence is not only in these individual acts, but in the seeming inability to collect data on smaller populations, in the lack of positive representation in our popular culture, in the hopes for political representation, and the ability to create change for us, now hinging upon whether we live in a state controlled by Republicans or Democrats and a majority extremist Supreme Court. That, too, is violence. But we can respond to violence with great acts of love. Like Nobuko Miyamoto said last weekend, let's fight Asian hate with Asian love. Let's love ourselves extraordinarily. We can love ourselves, and when one loves wholeheartedly, it stops being a zero-sum game. Love multiplies exponentially once we decide to do it with our whole beings. Jesus taught us to love your neighbor as yourself. Loving our own people, loving ourselves wholly and extraordinarily, means love has only one way to grow, and that is out. Marge Piercy wrote in her poem, "To Be of Use," I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who stand in the line and haul in their places, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. I think what we miss sometimes in these heady days of nostalgia, tokenizing civil rights giants, is that the people who first begin to do the work for justice are not huge figureheads. They are not the only ones, and they do not start out as legends. They are the people who work in a row, pass the bags along, the ones who show up in gatherings and meetings and community events, the persistent ones with a shared commitment. Rather than seek greatness, we are meant to seek wholeness, to seek love. Rather than seek a quick win or a flashy photo op, we are meant to move doggedly toward change, not just for one, but for all. Our liberation has never been for us alone. We are inextricably bound up in the joy and freedom of shared liberation for all of us. Together, we build. A powerful image for Christians is that of the neighbor. One of the commandments Jesus gave was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, and the second was like it, love your neighbor as yourself. For Christians, when we are at our best, it has meant we work for affordable housing, racial justice and civil rights, welcoming refugees, ministry with those imprisoned or experiencing housing insecurity. Neighborhoods are, as Christian author Diana Butler Bass says, ecosystems of relationships between people. And it is not just Christians, as we have heard, who are moved by the central concern for neighbors. Judaism in Leviticus and throughout the scriptures mandate a proactive love of neighbor. Hinduism directs the faithful to not do to another what would cause pain if done to you. Taoism states, regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain and your neighbor's loss as your own loss. In Islam, one should wish for a sibling what is wished for oneself. Neighbors in contemporary, predominantly white United States do not always belong to one another. Sometimes we're just living in proximity. But the religious understanding of neighbor across traditions is that we belong to one another. We claim and are claimed, even those who are vastly different. The Prophet Muhammad insisted different kinds of people are neighbors. In the Christian tradition, Jesus made neighbors of sex workers, people of different religious groups, and people who were social outcasts by virtue of their occupation, their disability, their gender, or their marital status. The poem Beginners by Denise Levertov says, "We have only begun to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle." an invitation to community, to become neighbors with those very different from ourselves, is not only a religious imperative for many of us, it is also a site of power. We know our liberation will be when people are allowed to live wherever they can make a life, where trans people can live into who they were meant to be without fear of persecution, where temples, mosques, and gurdwaras are built without facing down bigoted opposition masquerading as concern about traffic, without having to integrate a plan for security against violence, where our children can go to school without fear they will be gunned down, our elders may freely walk, unafraid they will be attacked, and more than without fear, because we deserve to live without fear, but that all of us live where we are provided what we need to flourish. It is not enough to be without fear. We must be able to live possibility, joy, community. We have each other. Liberation is a community effort. At a panel last weekend, Helen Zia encouraged the gathered to make this a time in which we reclaim the common thread of our humanity. It is that, and it is more. Beyond relearning how to be fully human, we need to relearn how we are fully created, how we are interdependent with all creation, that how we treat animals and sea creatures and the trees is indicative of how we treat other people, and how firmly we believe what our religions have taught us about how we are a part of creation, what our role in creation is, that the health of creation is the same as our health. It has been so much these 40 years since the murder of Vincent Chin. For many of us and for our peoples, it has been a long few or several centuries of dehumanization, of destruction of this beautiful home, of destruction of the lives we and our ancestors tried to build. We are tired, me, but maybe more than just me. This road has been longer than any of us wants it to be, and the forces of evil, greed, and apathy are allied against us. But with love, with community, we are stronger. Not just tolerance, not just welcome, and not just acceptance. Not merely the casual North American version of neighborliness. We need more than a quarter cup of sugar in a pinch, or a bit of casual conversation about the tomatoes. We need to love each other with ferocity. We need aggressive affirmation. We need stubborn love that perceives beauty in difference and diversity. White supremacy has built a lot of walls, and only a love willing to scale those walls and drop down on the other side with arms outstretched can save us. It is a deep hope that we share, the reason for which we gather. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "We will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope." Hope is the enemy of power, privilege, and oppression. Love, solidarity, imagination, and joy are the enemy of evil. Not optimism you can buy off the shelf in the 21st century United States, but hope, a deep and abiding hope that knows what matters is fierce and stubborn love, audacious hope for a better world. We are called by the times in which we live, by the religious traditions we practice, to a renewed commitment. Some of you have been in the movement for a long time, and some of us are a little bit newer to it, but all of us are being asked to recommit to this work of joy, of imagination, of love. Look to your neighbor. Look to your right and to your left, behind you, in front of you, to those who are joining us virtually, to those creatures and creations all around us. Some of us forget are our neighbors too. Look how beautiful we are. And promise to recommit, to choose hope over despair, to choose to love and affirm before we even understand, choose inclusion over exclusion, to decide to draw the circle a little too big, to fight for what is right, to listen to what the little ones tell us, to love the universe enough, to feel the love of the universe enough, to hang on just a little bit longer, to honor the legacies of those who went before us, and especially those who come after us by doing our work. May it be so.
I invite you to stand as we join together in our Interfaith Litany for Justice. With the rolling waters of mighty streams, we gather to join the movement of God's justice. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. With the future dreams of a mustard seed, we come together to join the interfaith movement of liberation. It is true that as we struggle for freedom in America, we will have to boycott at times. But we must remember that a boycott is not an end within itself. The end is the creation of the beloved community. It is this love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of people. Ringing with prayer and praise, bringing our unique gifts and passions, let us build the beloved community, moving with faith and action in the world. Amen. I invite you to remain standing as we sing our closing song, the second verse of Let There Be Peace on Earth.
In my tradition, a blessing. And before I do that, I want to acknowledge that sometimes in this work we get angry. In my tradition, the one I follow, Jesus also got angry when he saw people being exploited. Poet Marge Piercy wrote, "A good anger acted upon is beautiful as lightning and swift as power." So whether you feel anger and because you are moved by love and because you are not alone, go out into the world in peace to make justice, to widen the circle, to build alliances, to create family. And may the sacred surround you, giving you strength. May your ancestors guide you, and when your hope falters, may you be surrounded with people who can remind you that you are beloved and you are not alone. May it be so.